In your quest to create more wealth, there are three assets that literally never lose value. And the thing that's super interesting is you already have these assets. These are not assets that you need to acquire. They are assets you can develop, however, but they're assets that you already have. And it made sense to me to do this video in order to share with you the very free assets that you have, I have, we have, in order to develop not only ourselves but also the people around us, but then more importantly accrue and accumulate more assets. Now, you've probably heard, like I've heard many times, especially when I was growing up, about the story of the wealthy man who loses it all and makes it all back. Now, that quote unquote rags to riches story, or rags to riches story, or riches to rags to riches story, is a very common story. It's a story framework that, if you're someone who studies media or any kind of storytelling content, you'll find again and again and again. This is something they talk about, just that journey, that framework journey. And the reason why it's something people talk about a lot is because it's actually a journey we all go through. No matter how much you have, the insatiable desire within human beings is to want more. Now, unfortunately, many a time the things we want are not necessarily things that even if we get, we will be satisfied by, which is where I think things generally go wrong. But in essence, when we understand that we're wired to want to produce more, that's the creator within us. What generally tends to happen is we start to focus on the things that we can produce, that when we produce, everything literally starts to work for us more effectively. So, if you're new here, my name's Samuel. I can win a Kimwin. I help people create consistent and then colossal cash flow using resources and revenues hidden in plain sight. And if you're someone who's back again, God bless you. Great to see you again. So let's jump into these free assets that you have, that I have, that basically never reduce in value. Now, the fact that they don't reduce in value, first thing I will say, doesn't mean that they're of much value. Okay, now they're extremely valuable to start with, but if you do not develop them, then they don't increase in value. All right, but even though they don't increase in value, they still don't reduce in value. So these assets are very, very important because they're some of the most vital assets you'll ever have in your life. And the first asset out of these three assets is your education. Okay, your education. I remember when I was really, really young, my dad used to say this to me. He used to say this to me about degrees, which is funny because right now my degrees in the studio are there on the back wall, and I purposely framed them. You should be able to see them, but I purposely framed them from the ground up to remind me that they're not who I am. They're not from up down, right? They're not who I am. They don't make me. But yeah, let's jump into this. So when I was really young, my dad used to say this to me. He used to say to me, if you don't go to school when you're young, you'll go to school when you're old. He used to say to me sentences like, the person who doesn't study in the daytime will end up having to use the nighttime to study, right? So I used to hear a lot of these kind of adages, parables, and stories from my dad, also from my mum, but mainly from my dad, around the importance of studying and education. But a lot of that was to do with mainstream education. And I kind of understand it now, in my 40s, because that was what I believe one of the most primary and paramount purposes as to why my dad came to the UK. So when the purpose of this long journey from one nation to another nation is for this specific thing, education, right? When that's the purpose, then it only starts to make sense why you will be adamant, and super hyper vigilant to ensure that your next generation or your children are super focused on what that thing was that caused you to leave your home country, where you came from, where you grew up, what you knew, your life, as you knew it, and create a new life in a new place, right? With literally just a suitcase. All right. Shout out to dad for that, because that's a game changer. And yes, we live in a day and age where now we have the digital nomad. We have people that are living all around the world with a suitcase. But like sometimes I think we have to take a step back and recognize the world today isn't what it was yesterday. And based on that, I think we have to give a lot of props to anyone, even to people that do it today, people that up and leave the country that they were born in, or the country where they had some kind of level of foundation, and go somewhere yonder, go and travel, or go and find a place. Well, my hat is off to all of you guys, any one of you guys, right? If that's you, my hat is off to you. So shout out to dad. So my dad used to say to me a lot of these stories and adages around basically education is essential. Education is the key. Like, and again, because my understanding was growing up that this is why he came to the country, it just made sense to me that education was important. However, growing up, I think I was academically fairly gifted. I think I am academically gifted. However, I don't think I took education very seriously. Definitely not in primary slash secondary school. Let's say secondary school more so. And part of that might be to do with a lot of the things I was going through at the time, the other things that took my attention. But nonetheless, like in school, yes, in maths, I was in the top set class, but I was still the student that Mr. Rahman, my math teacher that I remember the most, my top set math teacher, always used to complain about the fact I was talking too much, or I wasn't listening to him, or whatever else, right? And to those of you who remember Dr. Rahman, who had a Dr. Rahman, who had your own version of a Dr. Rahman, you know what it is. So that was my experience, right? Yes, I was in some of the top classes. In other classes, I was definitely not in the top. Like French, I can't even remember what set I was in French. But what I do remember is I got an F. So I'll leave that there. But the point I'm making is, I don't think in secondary school I took education extremely seriously. Fast forward to being released the second time from prison, having celebrated my 18th birthday in prison, and being kind of like, I'd use the word convinced slash placed under duress by my older brother. And guys, if you want that story, let me know in the comments below. To go back into education or go back to school, I decided to go back to college. And I specifically went on a college course, which was an advanced course in order to access university. That course used to be called an access course or an access to university course. And I studied that course for a year to get access to university. I finished that course, did actually really, really well, went into university. And that's when my degree journey started. And my degree journey is a really interesting journey. I studied 4 degrees, 3 of which I qualified, 1 of which I failed. The one I failed, I resat my exams the year after. And the reason I bring this up is because that journey of mine, having been released from prison the second time, to go and study 4 degrees comes because of what was, I use this term, injected into me. Injected into me by my parents around the importance of education. Injected into me around how education is essential. And because of that, when I kind of prodigal son vibe came to my senses after deciding to go back to college, I decided to pursue the things my parents told me to. They thought education was a big thing. They thought education was the answer. They thought education would rescue me or save me. So as a result, when I got serious with my life at the right age of 19, I decided to focus on education and thus studying 4 degrees. But I say this often, right? But I will say this now. I very quickly realized, having studied, I think 3 out of the 4, or let's just say all 4 degrees, that none of those degrees goes out there, picks up £50,000 for the year, comes back, brings it to you and says, Samuel, you don't have to work this year. And it was that loose realization, that loose kind of idea that made me realize, Samuel, something's got to change, because education, as you've been sold it, isn't education the way you thought it was. So that was a wake-up call for me. It was a wake-up call that made me start to think, I need to do something different. I need to stop relying on the, and I'm going to use this term, conventional education that I was told to acquire, because that conventional education won't help me to aspire higher to the things that I desire. And when I started to realize that, I then went on kind of like a new quest. But the good thing was, I think I realized that I had already been on the quest of true education for about 70, 90, maybe even longer, maybe even 120% of the time that I was actually pursuing the conventional education. And the reason I say that is because at the age of 19, I got my first full-time job working in an estate agency. And it was that year that I would say I grew a deep passion and desire to understand more about real estate and property for myself. So what I did is I started to enroll on web seminars, web classes, downloading e-manuals, and all of these other kind of non-conventional educational paths or processes to discover or to learn or to realize what I needed to do or what I would need to do in order to get through, in order to succeed. So think of it like this. You're studying full-time university. Let's say you're doing your undergraduate degree. But outside of that full-time education, you're going on webinars, you're going to seminars, you're going to events to learn how to earn. And that was kind of like a loose way of saying, like, that was kind of like what my story was for so many years. So throughout the years, even prior to getting married, then getting married, after having got married, like, I was always doing what you might call some form of extracurricular activity, some form of developmental or personal development outside of the conventional educational development. And the reason why, partly, I'm going to be very transparent, part of the reason I started doing that is because I had felt at the age of 18, 19, like my time was stolen away from me. I felt like I wasn't going to university at the year that other people my age was going to university. I think I was like a year behind or 2 years behind, right? And even using the language I'm using, year behind, 2 years behind, gives you an indication or showcases to you what I mean by the challenge or the problem with the way I saw it, right? Because I saw myself as behind instead of realizing that I have an asset that is never ever going to depreciate, and that's my education. Like, what have I learned that other people have not yet learned, which thus makes it a key resource of leverage for me. Okay, I didn't think of it like that. I didn't realize it like that. Why? Because I didn't understand what I felt I needed to share with you in this video. I didn't understand that my education is just one of 3 assets I have which can never depreciate. It can't depreciate. As long as I'm alive, my education will be an asset for me. But the challenge many of us have, the challenge I realized about myself at this time, was I thought my education was my qualification. I didn't realize my education is not my qualification. You see, many of us think our education is a qualification, but our education is not our qualification. Our education is our ability to create a transformation. So that was the challenge I had. The fact that I had the wrong view on what education was. And as a result, I never realized that my education is one of my assets that can never depreciate. And let me explain why this is so powerful before we go into the second asset. If you wrongly believe that your education is your qualification, then when things like AI emerges, okay, you may think that your degree in computing becomes obsolete because, oh, that degree was done years ago. But here's something that's interesting. The very day that me and my cohort in my undergraduate degree were graduating, we had one of our lecturers / professors, I'll say his name, Mr. Tony Mann, okay, who said to us at the university something very, very profound. He said, he came to us and he said, you know, he did his kind of speech, but part of his speech was, and I remember it like it was yesterday, part of his speech was him saying to us, you guys are the future mathematicians and statisticians of the world. And as you go into the world, I would like you to remember, and what he basically said to us in essence is, all of the things you've learned may have become irrelevant. Like, you may go into industry, and I'll give you an example of software, right? So there's a software we used to use in statistics or in university to study. It was called SPSS, right? And when you are in university, you might be using, for example, I'm making these numbers up just so you see what I'm talking about, but you may be using SPSS version 4, but in industry, they may be using SPSS version 7. And the reason is because when the university decided to get the license to SPSS, it was years ago. But the industry, because it's a profit generating industry, A, it generates profits and thus can pay for the most up-to-date resources. But B, it relies on those things to generate profit. So thus it's incumbent upon it to get the right stuff. Okay. So Tony Mann was basically breaking this down to us. He was basically saying, look, you're coming out of a university, a school environment, and many of the things you learn may be outdated. However, the industry you're going into, you are the newest minds. So take your mind and use your mind as the value. And he didn't say it like that, but that was in essence what I took from what he said on that day, all those years back, right? Multiple decades back now, which feels weird. But the reason this is important to me is because it helped me to see part of that journey. that my education was not my qualification. My qualification can become outdated and thus it can lose value. But my true, genuine education can never lose value because my true, genuine education is my ability to create a transformation. And that transformation for many of us starts within here. It doesn't start out there. It doesn't start with someone else. It doesn't start with how we can help others as much as it starts with how we can help ourselves. And when I say that, I don't say that to say from a selfish perspective. I say it to say from a perspective of, if I can't take care of me, I become incapable of being able to take care of you. I say it from that perspective. So the first asset that you have that cannot reduce in its value is your education. Now, I said this at the top, I'm going to say this again. Although it may not be able to reduce in value, it can accrue. There you go. I had the word accrue and increase all together, and incrue came out. But it can accrue value, it can increase in value. And that's a super valuable thing. Why? Because if you and I have assets that can't decrease in value, there's literally a stop loss. They can't go lower than that, but they can increase in value. Then it would be wise of us to start value stacking in these particular areas because they can't decrease in value. And one of the beautiful things about the fact they can't decrease in value is as we increase their value, as we increase their baseline, as we add more value to our education can't reduce in value from the new heights we take it to. So this is why this is so powerful. This is why this can literally set you apart in your field, in your industry, as an entrepreneur, as an influencer, as an investor, as someone who's even educating people, as someone who's saying to themselves, I want a better life going forward. I actually want to see things the way I want things to be. Then I'm here to tell you, you have 3 specific assets that can't reduce in value. And the first one's education, right? So caveat with that, education, just don't assume we're talking about qualification. We're talking about real education. Your ability to find someone who has a solution, discover the solution from them, your ability to add your creative juices and maybe take a solution that's already implemented and take it to a whole new level, your ability to see things from one vernacular, from one environment, from one industry and replicate it in another industry, in another environment, like that's education. That's education. Education is the ability to spot patterns, recognize patterns. Like there's so many depictions I can give of education, but education is the real value that we hold. It's our awareness. It's our stackability of knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Let's go deeper. The second asset is enthusiasm. Your enthusiasm, if you haven't realized it, your enthusiasm is your key to open probably 90% of doors that you come in contact with. And I remember this so many years ago. I heard this from John C. Maxwell. Dr. John C. Maxwell said, this was so many years ago when I heard this, right? He basically said, your attitude determines your altitude. Like, I want you to think on that for a moment. Your attitude determines your altitude. So you can have the right attitude and it can elevate your altitude. But some people with the wrong attitude literally reduce their altitude. Now, you might be saying, well, Samuel, hold on a minute. If the wrong attitude can reduce my altitude, then surely my enthusiasm isn't an asset that can't decrease in value. Now, this is where this gets special. The reason why your enthusiasm doesn't and cannot reduce in value is because even if you have, or if you decide to have a poor attitude, which will reduce your altitude, it doesn't take away your decision to shift your attitude. So your enthusiasm can be turned on anytime you desire. Your enthusiasm doesn't have a kill switch or a dead switch. It doesn't have a dead switch. I think a dead switch is what I'm thinking it is, right? But I'm assuming a kill switch or a dead switch is something which assassinates it, right? And says no more enthusiasm ever again going forward, right? But your enthusiasm doesn't have that. Like, you can become enthusiastic about anything you desire whenever you desire. And if you learn to cultivate your enthusiasm, your whole life can change. So I'll give you an example. It was really challenging for me to do this video, because I was saying to myself all of the reasons why this particular day isn't convenient to do a video. But the thing that's super interesting about the fact I'm doing this video is the thing that got me to do this video is my enthusiasm. The fact that I said to myself, but you've been doing a video each day. Why would you stop today? I infused myself and got myself in an enthusiastic state enough to do the video. Now, I don't know if I'm less energy, low energy than usual as it pertains to these daily videos, but one of the things I recognize is because we have the ability to decide how we utilize our enthusiasm, the enthusiasm of each and every one of us is actually a non-reducing asset. It's an asset that can't be reduced. So if you do find yourself messing up, if you do find yourself deciding to have a poor attitude, which ultimately takes you down in altitude, just remember that you have an asset in your enthusiasm that you can take and utilize to break the low altitude and start to reascend into a high altitude by choosing the right attitude. Okay, so I pray that was of value for you. And if there's anything in this video that you find valuable, feel free to let me know in the comments below. It goes a long way in terms of encouraging me and letting me know that you're catching value. But then secondarily, it also allows the platform to say, oh, this content is worthy of a comment, so let's share it with other people who may think the same. Okay, so that helps. And if you're not subscribed, you know what to do. You can subscribe as well. Let's go into the third asset. The third asset that I wanted to share with you that has no ability to decrease itself, decrease in value primarily. The first one was our education, your education. The second one was our enthusiasm, my enthusiasm. And the third one is our empathy. Okay? Empathy is such a game changer, and most people have no idea how it works. So let me give you a quick snapshot on how empathy works. I'm going to show you how empathy works in the marketplace to make people gazillions and quadrillions of billions. And then from there, we'll talk a bit more on empathy. So let's jump into this. So one of the things I often share with my coaching clients is that the biggest givers always get. Okay. And that might sound a bit weird. The biggest givers always get. How does that work, Samuel? Because, you know, I've got an auntie who gives selflessly and she gives everything she can to me and my family, but for some reason she doesn't seem to get, right? You see, you can take it how you want to take it, but I'm going to tell you how it is. The Bible literally says, when two disciples came up to Jesus and they said, Jesus, we're literally looking for cheat codes right now. We want the secret sauce on how we can become the greatest of all. Okay, how can we be the greatest? And Jesus gives a powerful principle. Now, this might not be a biblical interpretation, but this is definitely some business application. Listen to this. Jesus says to them, if anyone desires to be the greatest among you, he must first become the servant around you. You see, Jesus said, the framework and formula to actually having greatness is actually engaging in servanthood, right? So that's serving others, right? Zig Ziglar said, if you help enough people get everything they want, you will ultimately have everything you want. Jim Rohn used to say that service to many leads to greatness. Okay, and I can go on and on because it's just the principle Jesus spoke in different renditions, but the key is it's empathy. It's empathy. It's recognizing that other people require service and placing the requirement of those other people's service above your requirement to be served. Okay. Now, Samuel, what do you mean? I'll give you an example. The biggest givers get. That's what I shared a moment ago. So let's break this down. Now, oftentimes when I'm in a coaching session with, a number of students, I'll ask them the question. I'll say, who here has a Google Mail account? If you do, raise your hand. Okay. And typically, every single person in the training's hand goes up, all right? And then I say to them, how much did you pay for that Google email account? And typically, most people are like, I didn't pay anything. It was free. I got the free version, okay? The free version, check that out, right? So everybody in the room typically has a Google Mail account. And everybody in the room typically paid no pounds, no pence, no dollars, no cents for their Google Mail account. And then I typically ask them, okay, who here got storage with your Google Mail account? How much storage you get? And they're like, I got 2 gigabytes, etc. They talk about all the storage space they get with their Google Mail account. And I'm like, okay, so how much you pay for that storage that came with your free Google Mail account? And they're all like, no pounds, no pence, no dollars, no cents, right? They got it for free. And then I'm like, did you realize that Google is one of the fastest growing businesses in the last 2 decades? However, Google has given everybody a gift. And it's at that juncture that people are often like, wait, what? Samuel, what are you talking about? And then that's when I usually go down the rabbit hole of sharing with them other businesses that have done the same thing. So for example, Facebook, again, one of the fastest growing businesses in the last 2 decades, but Facebook gave everybody a free Facebook account. Instagram, exactly the same. Obviously they were purchased by Facebook, but exactly the same, okay? And we can go on and on. YouTube, giving everybody free space to store their videos, giving everybody a platform to showcase their content. Like all of these things, right? The biggest givers get. Like many people don't realize that one of the powerful values of YouTube is that they decided before a lot of these other platforms to start sharing the currency, sharing the revenue that they were generating with their actual content creators. So someone like myself can come online, someone like myself can record myself, someone like myself can make videos, put them on the internet. And because I choose the platform of YouTube, YouTube has chosen, as of multiple years back now, to share part of the revenue that they generate through means of my content or a content creator's content and influencer's content with that person specifically. And that I believe, I definitely know, but that I believe was one of the catalysts to YouTube becoming one of the fastest growing businesses in the last 2 decades. Okay. Now, Samuel, why is that? Because they're giving, and the biggest givers get. Now, we're not talking about giving to a predicament of you have nothing left, but we're talking about if you look at the most creative givers in the marketplace, the people that are giving things in a way that no one else is giving at that time, they often create an opportunity and a lane that no one else can catch up with. Now, this is empathy, and there's several examples, right? But this is empathy, okay? And you're thinking like, empathy, what's this got to do with empathy? Because I've only ever heard about empathy as it pertains to someone going through something and you say, no, I'm going to be there for you. Well, Friends, the TV show that many of us watched at some point of our life, is not the doctrinal definition of what empathy is, okay? I'll be there for you, right? If you didn't catch it, right? Like, that's not what empathy is about. Empathy is about recognition of requirements and need. Empathy is about recognition of what you may say is a perceived lack. Empathy is at the heart of true entrepreneurship, because true entrepreneurship is our ability to solve someone else's problem. And in order for you to be able to solve someone else's problem, it would do you well, it would be of value to you to take a step back and think about what their problem is. And the more you fixate and fascinate about someone else's problem, the more you activate your empathy. And this is why empathy is an asset that you and I have that cannot reduce in value. Because what happens is we can start thinking about problems we have ourselves, but when we shift that mindset and start thinking about the problems of someone else, we increase our empathetic juices. And as we start to increase our empathetic juices, we're positioning ourselves most accurately to be of most value to other people, because we're not just thinking about ourselves. Now, there's so much more I could break down on this topic, but for the sake of time, let me know in the comments if you'd like me to do that. But whether we do or whether we don't, whether I will or whether I won't, I want you to know something extremely powerful, and that's you have 3 assets that will never reduce in value, and all 3 of them can only increase in value. So my encouragement to you is to leverage those assets and use them so you can move further faster in your future. Samuel Akinwin signing out. Always remember that small keys open big doors. Good day, God bless. I'll see you on the next. Let's go.